Hey, healthy runners, have you been putting in the work during marathon training and you're worried that you won't be ready for success come race day? Dr. Duane Scotty here, and today we're diving into the ultimate race day strategy to help you master your marathon. Whether you're a seasoned marathoner or gearing up for your first 26.2 miles, this episode is packed with tips and tricks to ensure that you cross that finish line feeling strong and smiling. So, lace up your running shoes and let's get started. Welcome to episode 245 on the Healthy Runner podcast, where we help you get stronger, run faster, and enjoy lifelong injury free running. I have Coach Whitney Lacombe from our Spark Healthy Runner coaching team with me here today, and she's going to share some proven marathon strategies for success. Welcome back to the show, Coach Whitney. How you doing today in sunny Arizona?
I am doing great. Thank you for having me. As anybody knows, I love talking about running and I love talking about marathons. So this is right up my alley. And I am actually in the depths of marathon training. So this will come in handy for myself in a few weeks. So I'm excited.
I love it. So you're gonna share the things that you're gonna be going through in your own personal running journey that can also help us. Do you mind sharing with the listeners, and viewers on how many marathons you have run personally, and then how many clients would you say that you've helped really conquer their marathon goal race?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've completed 7 marathons to date. I am currently training actually for 2 marathons, which sounds kind of crazy. And I think I'm like mid 50s in the number of clients I've helped train for marathons, somewhere around there, 50 plus for sure. But it's a fun distance. It definitely takes some preparation. So buckle up. You're in for some fun.
Oh man, the preparation is key. And I always, like to say that, we need to respect the marathon and that it is such a different ball game, honestly, than the half marathon distance. I feel like it's not just double the distance, like some people just look at the numbers and the mileage and they're like, well, I've done a half marathon or I've done a couple of half marathons. Like, let me run a marathon. Or you have those that just want to set like big hard goals for themselves personally, and they really haven't been running for a while and they're like, let me do something really freaking hard, let me run a marathon. And they haven't actually done those steps and built up in the way that we really recommend runners do in order to stay healthy, and they go from 5K right to the marathon. So it is a distance that definitely needs to be respected, and I know your tips are going to be super, super helpful, whether or not someone is seasoned or they're just starting out or they're just training for their first marathon. So, really, today, what we're going to be covering is really like the ultimate race day strategy for runners to master your marathon. We're going to talk about race day preparation with a plan. We're going to talk about marathon pacing strategy, marathon nutrition strategy, hydration, how to adjust for weather on race day. And we're going to even talk about like what to wear, what's going to be your marathon race day kit, as we call it. And then really most importantly, and this is the part that most people struggle with, is the mental strategies to use during your marathon. So, we're going to get into all that. And if you're new to the show, we teach you how to execute the 6 parts in growing in your running journey. So, you'll not only feel more confident in getting stronger and faster as a runner, but you're going to stay healthy and enjoy the process of running again. And you're going to crush some marathon races along the way. And what are those parts? One is mindset, two is strength training. 3 is the run plan, 4 is nutrition, 5 is recovery, and 6 is race day strategy. Therefore, in today's episode, you are going to get your race strategy bucket filled with a bunch of goodies from Coach Whitney for your marathon race. So I'm excited to get into all of this. And I will let you know, guys, that we have a freebie download about much of what we're going to kind of cover today and even more details in our ever popular Marathon Blueprint ebook. So, in that ebook, we get into marathon mindset, training plan, base building, strength training for marathon training for beginners, for those first timers. For those coming back from multiple marathons, looking to take it to the next level, we get into advanced marathon training, what that looks like. We get into mistakes to avoid during your marathon training. We talk about marathon training nutrition, marathon training in the hot summer months. We talk about marathon recovery, post marathon mistakes to avoid right after your marathon, and then marathon gear recommendations. So this is loaded with a bunch of goodies. And this has just recently been updated. So if you've downloaded this in the past, a year or two ago, you're going to want to get the new download because there's so much more goodies in it and trainings just like this, where we'll kind of do a deep dive in a particular area. So you can get your free download. Just go to learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com/marathon. And Coach Whitney, before we get into really these tips that you're going to share, I know you mentioned you are training for 2 marathons right now. Do you mind sharing which marathons you will be running?
I know. I still can't, like, my brain's like, why are we doing two? Like, why? What are we doing? So I am training primarily for the Tucson Marathon in December here. I live in Southern Arizona. I live in Tucson. So this is technically my home race, even though it's like an hour plus drive from my house. So that is my goal race. I have set a pretty lofty time goal for myself, which I have not announced to anybody yet. I'm kind of keeping that quiet still. And so that is my A goal race. I am also training for the New York City Marathon, which is November 3rd. And I am going to actually use that as kind of a training run for the Tucson Marathon. So I'm actually running that with a friend of mine. We're going to run together. I'm going to kind of pace her, kind of run together, do that together. So I'm training for both of those. New York is 8 weeks from this past Sunday, and then Tucson is 14 weeks from this past Sunday.
Nice.
So we're in the depths of all of it. So it's exciting.
And this would be your third New York, correct?
Second, I ran last
Second.
year.
Okay. It was
I
like, why
ran
do
it
I feel
last year. It was
like
amazing.
why do I feel like you've already done it twice?
I kind of feel
I
like
guess
I have
because
to. I had a lot of clients 2 years ago that ran it, so I
right.
kind of
I
felt like I
think
was running it.
right.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm probably thinking of.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Yeah. And for those of you who are new, my marathon experience personally, I've run 4. So I am representing my Connecticut 26.2 shirt on right now. So I do live here in Connecticut, and I've run the Hartford Marathon twice. And then I've done the Cape Cod Marathon and then the Disney Marathon as part of the Dopey Challenge. So it's kind of my personal running experience. And then I would say, worked with hundreds of clients really that have gotten healthy in order to kind of achieve their marathon goals. So this is something that has been a personal journey of mine these last really 5 years in, personally mastering the marathon. So I'm always intrigued to learn more. I love learning. I love growing. I love improving. So I'm looking forward to kind of having this conversation with you today, Whitney. So if we could start out, because I think everything starts out with a good plan. So when we are, thinking about our marathon race day strategy, what are some of the things we should be planning for?
So having a plan is like the number one thing you need to start thinking about when you register for the race. I am most likely going to run the Chicago Marathon next fall. And I'm already starting to plan. I'm already looking at hotel prices and like trying to plan it out because sometimes you have to plan it a year in advance because things sell out. I have a client who is going to be registering for the Grandma's Marathon, and that opens, I think, tomorrow or today. And she was like, I have to get on there right away because it sells out. So you need to start planning now for your marathon. Most likely, if you're listening to this episode, you are training for a marathon or you're getting ready to race your marathon. So you've hopefully booked your hotel, you've hopefully booked your flight, you have, figured out how you're going to get to the start. All of those things need to be planned out pretty far in advance, especially big races like New York where you have to select your transportation. So the New York City Marathon this year is running on November 3rd. You have until I think today, September 10th, to make your selection of how you're going to get there. After that, you're on your own. You have to figure it out on your own. So the ferry fills up, the bus fills up. You have to select that so far in advance. So you need to make sure that you're planning all of these things with enough time so you get what you want, if that makes sense. Hotels are going to be cheaper the further out you book them. You wait until a couple weeks before. One, you're probably not going to find anything. And two, if you do, you're going to be paying a lot. So book early, all of the things. We have an awesome podcast where I talk about traveling to races, because I do that for most of my races. As if you're watching the video, I'm wearing my Flying Pig marathon shirt. That was the last marathon I did back in May. And I had to plan all of that out in advance. And for that race, my mom was with me. So I had to not only plan the logistics for myself, but I had to plan her logistics, like where she was going to meet me, how she was going to get there, what time, all those kind of things, which was great because I ended up seeing her twice and it was so fun. But you need to plan ahead of time. It will minimize your stress. Race week, you can kind of relax. I mean, you're going to have the taper crazies because we all do, but you won't have the added stress of, oh my gosh, I didn't make dinner reservations, or oh my gosh, I don't know where my race kit is, because you've planned it all out ahead of time. You can relax. It will minimize that stress. I like to start packing super early. And honestly, at the time of this recording, we're in September and New York is November. I've already made a pile of things in my running closet. Like, most of them are like silly things that I won't really need between now and then, like the arm sleeves that I'm going to take and the toss clothes that I'm going to take and donate, and a rain poncho and a Mylar blanket, like those kind of things that I won't need between now and then, but I have found. And I'm like, oh, might as well make sure I'm going to take these, all that kind of stuff. So you want to start making your lists, checking them twice, and making sure you have everything planned out.
Yeah, and is that the one that I was maybe mistaking New York for? Because Cincinnati, the Flying Pig, you ran that twice, correct?
Since the Flying Pig, this past year, I did the 4-way challenge. So it was the 1 mile, 10K,
Right.
5K, and full. And the year before, I did the 1 mile, 10K, 5K, and the half. So I
Okay.
did do
Okay.
Cincinnati twice, but I've only done the full for
All
Cincinnati
right.
once. I am doing
So
that
I think
again this May, which I already have airfare and I already have my hotel. And my whole family is coming, including my kids and my husband and my dad and my mom. Like, so all of that logistics is already in the works for May. So
Yeah, so as you guys can see, Whitney really practices what she preaches. She is a planner. That's pretty amazing, by the way, that you have all that set. And I think, yeah, that's where my brain was going to. And it wasn't the actual marathon that you ran that first year, but it was all the other races. I think that's where I was getting confused with New York.
yeah.
But if the travel arrangement, and I know you did that deep dive in episode 222 on the Healthy Runner podcast. So if you guys have a destination marathon, definitely check that episode out. I will also drop it in the show notes for you guys, because I know you really shared some like really in-depth tips in that one with like lists of everything to pack. And yeah, that was like super, super comprehensive. So I would highly recommend you guys check out that. So really having a plan, make those travel arrangements early, make any reservations that you need. I know you mentioned how you're going to get to the race, like for New York. Any other things? I think pretty much really just plan ahead, essentially. Like you have to start this early. Like you shouldn't, hopefully, you're not listening to this like a couple days before your race, is what you're saying.
Right. You don't want to be listening to this on your flight to your race 2 days before, because then clearly you don't have a plan. Or maybe you've already listened to this episode and you're re-listening, and that's cool. We like
There we
that.
go.
But you do
There
want
we
to
go.
start early, because then you can check all the boxes. Make sure you've done all the things, and we do have a nice checklist. So you can feel free to download that and print that out. I always do. But another thing you want to make sure you kind of plan, and this is going to sound silly, you want to plan where the bathrooms are on the way to your race. Because if you're like me, I have a nervous bladder, and my husband makes fun of me every single time he goes to a race with me, because I'll get in line and use a porta potty, and as soon as I get out, I get right back in line. And he's like, "What are you doing? You just went." But for me, like, that's just one, it passes the time, but then I have that mindset of I'm not going to have to pee during the race. So know where the bathrooms are. Like certain before Flying Pig, I know I can go into Paycor Stadium. They have great bathrooms that you can actually flush. They have running water to wash your hands. So you can go in there a few times before you have to go to the start corral. Just kind of know the area, know the race start. Maybe you have to stop at a gas station. Maybe they have lots of porta potties, whatever the situation is, know where those are at. Yeah. Runners like to talk
Okay.
about bathroom issues. So sorry.
Yeah, the bathroom always comes up, but it's so important, right? You gotta hit that porta potty. You usually want to make sure you not only get a lot of number ones in, but you do want to get a number two in, usually before your marathon. It's very important, so you don't have to worry about that during your race and having to stop for any extended periods of time during your race in the porta potty. All right, so make a plan. So now let's get into, and this is something that we cover with all of our athletes who are running a marathon. And I love these calls. Like I just had a couple of pacing strategy calls with clients. But yeah, let's get into kind of like the pacing strategy for a marathon. And what are some of the key principles, the key things that you want your athletes to know, and really those that are listening to this who are running their marathon, what do we need to, think about in terms of pacing strategy for the marathon?
So, this is going to be so individual. Everybody is going to be different, especially if you're running your first marathon. It's going to be so much different than somebody who's running their 10th marathon. When I have pacing calls with my clients, if it's their first marathon, we set the goal to finish. We try not to have a time goal attached to a first marathon just because you don't really know how you're going to feel over those 26.2 miles. Now, I will say that with that being said, we're not going to have a time goal. I do put time or speed limits on my clients, especially for the first few chunks of mileage. And that's a speed limit. Don't go faster than whatever this pace is. Make sure you're holding back. Don't go faster. Now, that's also different depending on the individual, depending on the course. Does the course undulate a lot, up and downs? Is it super flat? Is it all downhill? Is it like Boston where you go downhill for a good chunk of time and then those hills are at the end? You have to kind of base your pacing plan off the course and how experienced you are. So I like to know the course. I like to study the course map and not just the turn by turn, like on the Google Maps map. I like to look at the elevation profile, and most races have some sort of an elevation profile map that'll show you here's a hill, then you go down, then you're flat, kind of show you the craziness or not of the race. So I like to study that. I like to know if there are any sharp turns because some races have those crazy like hairpin turns that are basically a U-turn. I hate those. I absolutely hate those.
Right.
Why did you put those in there? It's so silly. But you want to know where those are so when you're planning your pacing, you can account for those. You can account for the big hills. Now, I like New York has a lot of hills because of the bridges. So you want to know, okay, mile 16, you're going over the Queensboro Bridge. It's going to suck. You're going uphill. It's mile 16 of a marathon. It's probably hot at this time of day. Just be prepared mentally and physically to maybe dial it back a smidge during that mile, and then you'll feel fresh towards the end. That kind of stuff. I would say I always, no matter who you are, I'm going to tell you to start slow. You want to hold back because, especially those first 3 miles, everybody is so excited. That gun goes off. You are just filled with the adrenaline and the excitement. And then you have everybody else around you that's all pumped as well. So everybody's just like jazzed, right? Most likely you're going to be surrounded by people that are going to book it and go out too fast. Those are the people you're going to pass at mile 16, mile 18, mile 20 that are dragging because they went out too hard. So I usually say the first 3 miles you want to hold back. That's your warm up. You want to make sure that you are dialing it back, not pushing the paces, especially if your race starts on a downhill. Because you're going downhill, you're going to feel great, right? That first start of the race, downhill, easy peasy. But what's going to happen is you're going to go hard and then you're going to burn out essentially, or just have tired legs. And that's just not fun. So you want to hold
Yeah,
back.
and this is the most important thing, honestly, that you kind of already mentioned a couple really key things. So I just want to highlight these, Whitney, because many people might just gloss over them. And I just need to reiterate that if this is your first marathon, there are, like, Whitney's going to start talking about pacing strategy here and how we go about that. If this is your first marathon, you do want to have a pacing strategy more so you can hold back and not essentially be walking, the last 6 miles of your marathon. Like, trust me, I've been there, I've done that. It was actually at my first Hartford marathon, cramping 6 miles at the end. It's not a fun place to be. It's not a place that I want any of you listening to this to be there. It's the most common mistake first time marathoners make. And the reason is because usually the expectations are not really living up to the actual experience. And I always tell all my athletes this, that, like, you're first, you only get one first, right? I wish I could take back that first Hartford marathon. And, we really strive to have our athletes walk away from the marathon feeling strong, confident, and crossing that finish line with a smile, and not feeling, that you're defeated, dejected, that you really shouldn't probably run another marathon, or it was so painful and it hurt so much, you had so many cramps, your ego took a shot when 500 people passed you in the last couple of miles. That's not what we want for you. So let me just kind of set that out right in front. This is why we're sharing this with you, is so that's not you on race day. All right. The other thing that I find so common, no matter who it is. And I again, trust me, like, I've been there. I did the same thing. I thought, like, hey, I was pretty fit. I worked out in the gym a lot. I did a bunch of half marathons. I was ready for the marathon. I could do it under 4 hours, no problem. You use the calculators online. You type in whatever your half marathon time is. You're like, oh, easily can do this under 4 hours. Again, to reiterate my point from before, it's not just double the time and like what you see in the pacing calculators online. That is for people who are experienced marathoners. They've done it before. Because as you see after you run your first, you will realize what I'm saying is that it is so different. And most of runners out there are not going to be the most fit in the longest distance. It's going to take you many marathon training cycles to actually have your paces match in terms of, like, the race calculator. Whereas I just onboarded a new athlete yesterday who she's run, I think, 25 marathons, and her fitness level is actually higher in the marathon than her 5K time. And we talked about that. And she raced some 5K races over the summer. So she's actually a faster marathoner than she is a 5K runner. Most of you going to the marathon for the first time are going to be faster 5K runners or half marathon runners than you will in any calculator. So don't use those times as a goal time. If it's your first, focus on the process, focus on finishing it feeling strong. Like, I highly recommend that. Do not have a set time in mind whatsoever. Like, have a process to execute a smart strategy that Whitney's going to kind of detail here, and then have that be your focus and go for the feeling that you're going to feel conquering 26.2 miles, feeling strong. Less than 1% of the population can actually do that, right? Like, all of that, and go to your why on why you're actually doing this marathon race to begin with. And that feeling I want you to have on race day for your first marathon. You're always going to be able to chase a number and time after that, because now you got one in the books, right? Now you got something to shoot for, something to run a little faster. So I know it's a point you made. Sorry to belabor it, but I find it so important. And I think it's the expectations, and having realistic expectations is going to allow you to really have, like, the marathon race experience you should have. So hopefully you guys listen to that wisdom. And then, just to reiterate your point on the first 3 miles, is that is the warm up. And for many of our athletes, your warm up for a marathon is literally the first 3 miles. You're not doing a 10-minute jog, a 20-minute jog. You're not even doing a dynamic warm up for most of you. It is literally going to get the blood flow into your muscles, your joints, your tendons, and purposely start out slow. And it's going to be a hard feeling to hold back because there's so much energy at the start line. Everyone is so pumped up. You got the announcer, right? You've just done like the national anthem. You've got like freaking fireworks, music. You got announcers revving you up, people ramped up around you. You see everyone around you, you're like, oh, okay, I got this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to conquer this. It's a feeling you need to practice in your long runs to hold back and know that you're checking in on your watch and having those speed limits that Coach Whitney is talking about. These 3 miles should be your slowest miles all race. And if they are, that means you've actually executed a smart strategy. So just to reiterate those points, such gold nuggets that you shared there. So what else do you have to add to after those first 3 miles that we are holding back? We're 15 to 20 seconds kind of slower than goal marathon pace. There are even some athletes that I'll even do a little bit slower than that, especially if it's their first or
I do.
second. Um, and then the other point I didn't make before is you have to check the course. You said that. I just want to reiterate that. We're going to kind of generally talk about pacing strategy, but it will change and be dependent upon, course specifics. Like you mentioned Boston, you mentioned New York, where they do have certain miles where you are going up hills and you need to account for that in the strategy. So, all right, where
Yeah,
do we go from
absolutely.
here?
So I will say, personally, usually that first mile for me is a full 30, 45 seconds slower than my goal race pace. I prefer to have negative splits in my races, so which means your first half of the marathon is slightly slower than the second half. You're going a little bit faster that second half. So for me, I like to start out even slower. Sometimes that's hard when there's all these people around you, but it's really important, especially a race like New York where you're going up. Your first mile is uphill, going up the Verrazano Bridge. That full mile of uphill, if you go out too hard, you're done. So just pay attention. Then sometimes I break a race into 5 parts. Sometimes I break it into 3. It depends on the course. If there are big hills, sometimes I'll put in like a little half mile into the pacing plan to dial it back or to go ahead and speed it up. It just depends on the course. In general, let's just say we are doing a flat course, we're doing Chicago. I would say mile 1 to 3, you want to make sure that's your warm up. You're going about 15 to 20 seconds or slower than your goal race pace. Then you're going to pick it up a teensy bit, about 5 to 10 seconds slower than goal race pace for mile 4 to 8. Okay, you want to gradually get faster. We're not going to finish mile 3 and be like, and my warm up's done. Here I go. No, you're going to gradually increase your paces. So mile 4 to 8, about 5 to 10 seconds slower than your goal race pace. Miles 9 to 13, to the halfway point, you're going to go about 10 seconds slower. You can, if you're feeling really good, you can go closer to race pace. You don't want to go above race pace, faster than race pace. So race pace to 10 seconds slower for miles 9 to 13. And then you're going to hit that halfway point. This is where I want you to take a mental check. You don't need to stop, but you need to mentally take a pause in your brain, keep running, but just think about, how do I feel? How are my feet feeling? How is my hydration going? How does my stomach feel? How are my glutes? Like, do a check in. Maybe you do head to toe. See how you are feeling. How is my mindset? Like, do I feel great? Am I just pumped? Am I running with no spectators and maybe I'm just bored and need to pump some music? Like, check in with yourself at the halfway point. If you are aiming to have a negative split, you want to be about a minute to 2 minutes ish slower than what your half of your marathon finish time would be. So let's say you're aiming for a 4 hour finish for the marathon. You want your halfway to be about 2 hours and 1 minute to 2 hours and 2 minutes, if that makes sense. That way, your second half is slightly faster because you've held back, you've got some left in your tank, right? Because we're following the pacing plan according to what our coach
Yes.
told us. So you're gonna do that. Then mile 14 to 20 is where you're gonna hit that
Hold
goal
on one
race.
second. If you don't mind, if I could
Yeah.
just interject there, just because I want everyone to understand when you mentioned the slightly faster and easing in and not just saying, okay, my warm up's done. Let me lock in on marathon goal pace right here. Um, the reason we do that is to prevent your heart rate from spiking and the effort level going too high. The longer that you can keep your effort level in check during the marathon, the better race you're going to have. So if you immediately get that heart rate to spike up high, whether it's due to heat, anxiety, or just going out too fast, it's going to be a long day for you. So what Whitney was talking about and gradually kind of easing into that pace and, over the course of a couple of miles, that really helps your body adjust to running the race and allows it to not spike your heart rate. Because a lot of times when our heart rate spikes up, it's really hard to bring back down, especially in a race setting. So the longer you can keep that under control, the better off you're going to be. And during those miles of just kind of gradually getting slightly faster, miles 4 to 8, um, I always tell my athletes to really focus on being relaxed, like their body totally relaxed. You're focusing on good rhythmic form. Your breathing is in control. You're making sure you're using your diaphragm. You're using your belly to breathe. You're not huffing and puffing. You're not chest breathing. Your shoulders aren't up to your ears, right? Like you're not tensing your neck muscles because if you're tensing them this early in the race, you're going to have like the worst knots in your neck at mile 20, mile 22, when you're trying to actually like run fast during the hardest part of the race. So the longer you can keep the whole body relaxed, it's like critical, guys. So like that should be the focus on these initial miles and certainly the first half of the marathon is being in control, right? And being in control of your body, being in control of your breathing. And then I love that you kind of talked about this halfway mark, doing a check in and being in control of your mind and like mentally, how are you doing? Right? Like, are you getting a lot of negative thoughts? Are you right? Like, just having that reset. And that's something that my coach kind of planned for me for the Cape Cod Marathon. And I remember that being like key when I got to that halfway mark. And it's like, hey, you're at that halfway mark. Okay, let's do like a full body scan, a head scan, right? How am I doing? How's the strategy going? Do I need to make any adjustments? Do you need a mental reset? Like if you feel like you are going, down some negative thought processes, then that's the time to like just snap, some sense into yourself and see what are you going to pull out of your toolbox that you can utilize at that point. So I love that you kind of mentioned that halfway mark of kind of doing that little bit of a scan, in addition to looking at your time. And then the last point I'll make, and I promise I'll hand it back over to you, is the marathon goal pace, just to make sure, because I don't think we mentioned this earlier, this should not be an arbitrary goal number that you've determined for your marathon. It should be based upon your current fitness level, not what you ran a marathon 10 years ago and you haven't run a marathon since, or 5 years ago because you haven't run one since COVID. It should be based upon current fitness level and what your training has been. So if you have races that you've done a 5K, it's really hard to extrapolate that one. But if you have a half marathon that you've done recently, then we kind of use that estimate as kind of where your fitness level is. And you can use the calculators to kind of determine what marathon pace should be. But you might even have to adjust that. Like I said, if you're not an experienced marathoner, you might use the calculator to get an idea of, oh, okay, my average marathon pace should be around a 9-minute mark, let's just say. But you don't have a lot of experience and you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself because you're going to get like really nervous, get anxiety during the race. So then why don't you make your goal a 9:10, 9:15, 9:20 pace, right? Like you can easily do that. So just to make sure that, what we're talking about here is not just an arbitrary number we kind of threw out of the air. It should be based on your current fitness level.
And
Thank
that
you.
might change throughout your training. You might start your training I mean, you're not going to start with marathon pace work right away in your training cycle, but as the training cycle progresses, let's say your marathon goal pace at the start of your 16-week cycle is a 9:30. Maybe by race day, your goal pace is a 9. Maybe it's gone the other way. Maybe now it's a 10 because you have a nagging IT band or something like that, and we've adjusted. So this is a fluid thing that kind of, if you're listening to this right before your race, you probably know what it is at this point where you are in your fitness. But it will and can change throughout your training cycle. I know when I ran the Mesa Marathon, I don't know, 2, 3 years ago, something like that, my original goal marathon pace was, I think, like a 10:30 or something. And then by the end of training, it had progressed and was a little bit faster. Now, I have no idea. I don't remember what I actually ran, but it was, it progressed. So work with a coach because they can definitely help you. And then you're just not pulling the random pace out of a hat. You have an actual pace that makes sense for you and your fitness. So
Great
there's that.
point.
Okay, back to the marathon. Now you're at mile 14. Between mile 14 and mile 20, this is where that goal pace, you're going to dial into that goal pace. You're going to get kind of settle in, get comfortable, hang out here. I would say you can go up and down a little bit above, a little bit below for those miles. Kind of want to average your marathon goal pace over those miles. Then mile 21, this is usually where people have to start digging deep. This is where we say, a marathon is 20 miles of a warm up to race a 10K. This is where you're going to start that. This is where you're going to probably have to dig deep. You're going to have to think about your why. You're going to have to get out those mental strategies, those, mantras, all of those things to help you get through these miles. Maybe you need like some really angry music to get you going. I don't know. Sometimes that works for me. But these last 21 to finish, I want to say 26.2, but let's be honest, marathons are usually like 26.5 because you are weaving and you never actually follow the tangent. So those last miles, you want to go a little bit faster than goal pace, about 5 to 7 seconds faster than goal pace. But this is also based on effort. If you're running a race, flying pig, the last bit is pretty flat. It does feel uphill because you're coming off a downhill. New York City Marathon, I don't know why, mile 25 to the finish is uphill. Why would you put a finish line on an uphill? That just is mean. So prepare for that. You've already checked out your course. You know where those hills are. You know if it's going to be uphill, but keep that in mind because you may have to dig a little bit deeper if you're finishing on a slight uphill. So, but this is all dependent on you. And I want to say, like, you do need to account for the hills. And sometimes running the hills based on effort versus paying attention to your watch is just going to be better for you mentally. Because if you're like sucking wind and it's hard and you're going up like a mile incline halfway through the race and you're just watching your watch or it's beeping at you telling you you're too slow, like that's just going to be deflating. Like it's not good. So base it off of your effort. Try and keep it even effort for what you were doing before and what you're going to do after that hill.
Yeah, and for me, the hardest part of a marathon is those middle miles. It is kind of those ones that get lost in the middle, where I do need to keep check in on my goal pace with my watch, right? Especially if it's not a huge marathon, and especially if it's not the crowd size aren't great. So, like I did Cape Cod last year. At this point, the middle miles were in residential neighborhoods. There were definitely blocks that I was running literally by myself, and no one was cheering. No one's outside their house, caring that I'm running, a marathon and I'm trying to, get a PR. Those miles are hard. Those middle miles for me, and I think it's something to be aware of as you go into the miles, because I think the finish, if you've executed the strategy, your finish, you will feel strong. And usually there's more like crowd support right toward the end, and you can kind of see it, the light at the end of the tunnel. But those, those, like I know Coach Lou likes to call it the cruise miles, where we're getting in our groove, we're not losing that goal pace. it is a matter of like that effort that you talk about, Whitney, is like staying just below threshold pace where you want it to feel comfortably hard. So this is like where it's starting to catch up, right? You're accumulating the miles where, you know what, this doesn't feel kind of easy. This is feeling like comfortably hard, but I'm not really breathing as heavy for those that are doing speed work. You're not breathing as heavy as you are like at the last mile of like a tempo or threshold effort run, but you're breathing heavy. It's comfortably hard. And it is a fine line and not going above that threshold, because if you do that, then it's going to be a tough last part for you. So it is like that kind of fine balance of pushing yourself to keep it comfortably hard so you're not falling off of that goal pace, and making sure that it is, that constant drip of, starches, sugars, electrolytes, salts that you're taking during that time period, and trying to, maintain your breathing rate and heart rate that's it's relatively in check. You don't want it getting out of control at this point. It's way too early in that kind of second part or those middle miles, before mile 20. And yeah, the mile 20 is like that mark, right? That we reach and we feel like, okay, now it is race time. Like you've earned the right to race at this point. And it is go time. And it is the time when you can actually start to really push here. And, this is going to be mentally the hardest part for you, because your brain is going to be telling you to slow down. Like this is feeling really hard. And this is where you want to practice your mental strategies in training so you're ready to actually pull them out on race day. But this is the part where it is a 10K race at this point. So I I love how you kind of described those different parts there, and this is, the hard part. But if you've kind of followed the plan that Whitney talked about, you will be feeling strong here. You will be passing people. You're going to notice people are slowing down and you're passing them. You're going to notice lots of people cramping up at this point, walking, and because you've kind of met those process goals of completing the first part, going out slow, completing the second part, gradually getting into pace, doing a mental reset, really locking in on your marathon goal pace. Like now you're able to give a kick and you're able to push it and, actually earn the right to race at this point. This is the fun part.
Right?
Kind of.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
Kind of.
so funny. You can tell the people who followed their plan versus the people just who went out willy-nilly and just were like, "I'm just gonna do whatever." Because you can tell mile 20 to the end, you can tell who followed their plan, who busted up, or who just had no clue what they were doing. Um, so people might say, "Well, how do I keep track of this? Like, do I just watch my watch the whole time? Like, what do I do?" So there are a few things you can do so that you can stay on top of your pacing plan. You can program it into your watch. Now, your coach can do it through whatever training app you're using, or if you have a Garmin, you can do it through the Garmin app. I think Apple probably has a similar thing. I'm not familiar with the Apple watches, but you can also buy a pacing band, which I have right here. This is one that I originally was going to use for Flying Pig, and then, like we talked about, my goal race pace increased. So this one I never ended up using because it was too slow. But these are nice because this one has a snap on it. So you can put it around your wrist and then you've got your paces and the elapsed time, which is kind of nice because big races, sometimes in the cities, Chicago, New York, London, Berlin, all those big city races with the buildings and all the people sometimes totally mess up your GPS on your watch, which happened to me. So last year, I just ran by feel for New York because I was like, forget it. I'm not going to try and deal with this anymore. But I was on the bottom of the Verrazano when I started. And so when I hit mile 1 at the flags, at the mile markers on the course, my watch said zero point 0.2 miles. And I'm like, what? What is happening? So I tried to hit the lap button and that totally screwed everything up. And my paces then were all off. So it either told me I was running a 5-minute pace or a 20-minute pace. So by mile 6, I was like, forget it. And I just flipped it to show me the time of day. Um, but if you have the elapsed time that you should be, okay, let's say at mile 6, I should be at 57 minutes and 59 seconds. You can kind of just watch the elapsed time on your watch and pay attention to that. You
Mm,
can also run with a pacing group. These are great. They can be great. Sometimes they're not so great, but most of the time, the Pacers have run several marathons. um, they don't allow pacers to sign up for pacing groups that are going to be a challenge for them. So the 4-hour pacer probably on their own runs like a 3-hour marathon. So this is going to be an easy pace for them. They'll talk you through the whole race, all that kind of stuff. They hold a big stick typically with balloons or something on it so you can spot them really easily. I know a lot of the big races at the expos, you can go and actually talk to the pacing team and find out what their strategy is. Are they just running by effort? Are they doing negative splits? Are they accounting for bathroom stops? What is their game plan? And then you can kind of decide if you want to stick with them or if you want to just kind of stick around them or what you want to do. But those are 3 options for you. Putting it in your watch, getting a pacing band, running with a pacer. All of those things are things that you can do. Or if this is your first marathon and you're just running by effort, run by effort. And that is going to be your best gauge.
yeah, you can't go wrong, honestly, with the effort, especially if you are in those big cities and the watch goes haywire and you have no clue. A lot of people freak out, right? If you're so dependent upon your watch and to know exactly what pace you are running. Trust me, I've been there before. It's happened to me multiple times. Luckily, not during a race yet, but I've definitely been there, and I'm like, there's no way this is true. um, so going on effort and knowing what it feels like and making sure that you're not at a 9 out of 10 effort before mile 20 in your race. If you are, you're going to blow up, right? So you're kind of keeping it at that 7 mark, 7 out of 10 effort until mile 20. And then that's really the only time that you can go anything above it, because technically that's like above your threshold. And now you're really pushing your body to the limits. So going on effort is a good gauge, and don't don't let your brain trick you, because for the first half of the marathon, you're going to run this race and it's going to feel amazing. You're going to be like, wow, I guess I'm actually more fit than I thought I was. Like you're getting caught up in the race itself and you just feeling like you're like walking on water, right? Like it feels so easy. Just don't let that trick you, because it will feel easy if you've done marathon training and you've put in the long runs and you've got your weekly miles up. Like the first half of marathon should feel freaking easy, really easy. um, so don't let that fool you, though, to increase your pace, before that halfway mark than like what we talked about. So just to put that out there, that it will feel easy, and it should, because if you think about it, like you're only quote unquote going at marathon pace. And especially if you've done, workouts in your training and you've done speed work, this is going to feel slow for you. And you have the adrenaline of race day, especially if it is a race with a lot of crowd support. All that adrenaline is going to make it feel really easy, but don't let it trick you. Hold back, hold back, don't adjust, and go on that kind of effort level. But I guess that's my caveat, using effort level earlier in the race. If you're like, wow, this feels like a 5, let me like go a lot faster. And if you can get too cute, and I don't want you guys to blow up here. I don't want you to hit that wall that people talk about at mile 20, at mile 22. And the other nice tip there is, if you haven't hit a wall by mile 22, you won't hit a wall, right? So that you can be confident, if you get to mile 22, there's no wall. You don't feel like, oh my goodness, I have to stop. Oh my goodness, my legs are cramping. Like, you are not going to hit a wall at that point. So feel confident that you can increase your pace and really turn it on and push hard during this closing part of the race.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
All right. Any
that's the
other,
process.
you think, I think we pretty much did a deep dive on pacing strategy there. Anything that you want to add to that before we, provide some nutrition, hydration tips for marathon strategy?
I just want to say, trust your training. You've done the work. You've probably put in the marathon pace work in some long runs. You've done all the long runs. You've done it. So this is your victory lap. So enjoy it. Don't stress. Make it fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a nice challenge, and that's why most of us as adults like racing, for the challenge, right? It gives us that challenge. If you ever did competitive sports or competitive in life, it's one of those challenges we like to do, right? And it's kind of the test, see where you are and see if all the work, the consistency that you've been putting in training, you can continually challenge yourself as an adult. So enjoy it, enjoy that challenge. And yeah, we're looking forward to you guys really executing that strategy. And if you follow this and you've had an awesome marathon, like, please reach out, like, let us know if it's been helpful for you. We always love getting messages from you, so we'll have all of our contact information where you guys are listening to this in the show notes. Reach out to us, whether it's email, Instagram, um, or Facebook. You can definitely catch up with Whitney and I. Now, Whitney, we've done a deep dive marathon nutrition episode with Brooke Zarnecki, our registered dietitian within our Spark Healthy Runner coaching team. For those that are listening to the podcast, you can get that in episode 137. It's also within that marathon blueprint download, the video version of that. But what nutrition tips do you think are really important to kind of highlight for those that are getting ready to run their marathon race?
Don't change anything. Hopefully, at this point, you've narrowed down and nailed down when and what you're going to fuel with, whether you're using gels or chews or waffles or just like a carbohydrate drink like Tailwind or Scratch Labs, whatever you've been using on your long runs, that's what you're going to use on race day. Don't change anything. Know your pace or your pacing. Know your fueling strategy when you're going to be taking that fuel. For me personally, I can't do run math when I'm running. So time doing it by time just like hurts my brain. So I do it by miles. So for me, I do every 4 miles. I start on race day. I start fueling though at mile 3 and then it's every 4 miles after that. So that way I'm making sure that my fuel is on board before I feel like I might need it or before I think I might need it. So, but it's the same. I'm using the same fuel. I'm not changing anything. The only thing that might change is maybe the location of my gels in my pockets. Like, honestly, I don't change anything. Before your race, you want to be eating what you're eating before your long runs. However, this is what I recommend for my clients and what I do. When I get up, because you're not getting up and going right out the door, basically, like you would for a long run, I eat half of what I would have before a long run. So for me, I eat an entire bagel and a banana. So before the race day, if I'm in the hotel, I'm going to have half a bagel. I might eat an entire banana because it's weird to only eat half, but I eat half of my breakfast. And then right before the race or about the same timing as before long runs, I would have another one. So I would have another half bagel. Maybe I'm not going to have a banana, but I'll take it with me in case I decide I want that. It's what your stomach is used to eating before your long runs. And you want to make sure that you do have something when you wake up because you don't want to wait 3 or 4 hours to eat before your race because then you're just hungry and that's just not fun, especially if it's one of those later start races. I know Boston, sometimes people don't start until 11. New York is like almost noon for some people. Like, make sure you're eating beforehand.
Yeah, and that's something too. Like, for those later races, I always recommend at least one or two long runs. Practice in your training of actually starting a long run that late, just so you know how that feels to wait all that time to almost like digest a breakfast and then take your pre long run fuel beforehand. But yeah, nothing new on race day. Practice it. If you're listening to this during your training cycle and you're not locked in on what your running fuel should be, you could try. You can edge gels for free. So we do have a offer with them to try 4 of them. I'll leave that link in the show notes below. If you guys want to give UCAN a try, that's what I use for my marathon fueling, to give kind of more steady, long-lasting energy. And they're smooth. They go down cleanly. They're not like thick. And, that's worked out for myself and, many other clients that we work with. So you guys could give UCAN a try. No harm, no foul. Give it a whirl and see if you like it. But yeah, I would definitely say nothing new on race day. Love
Yeah,
it.
some people like to use what they have on the course because then they carry less with them and they just grab as they need. Um, which I'm going to try for New York. I'm a little nervous that they might run out. So I don't know. I'm kind of like flip
I
flopping
know
back
that's
and
the thing
forth.
you risk, right? Or
Well, I
like just
emailed them.
someone making an error at a table and they didn't like replenish quick enough, and now you're standing there waiting for them to like pull it out of the boxes
I know.
behind. I don't know. Like that makes me nervous,
It
honestly.
makes me so nervous, but the thought of only having to carry 3 gels versus for the whole race versus 6, I'm like, "That sounds kinda nice." And
I
I did
know, but does it
email
make
New
that
York
much of a
Roadrunners.
difference? Let's think about it. Does it make that much of a difference? Like
No, not really.
carrying it doesn't, right?
No,
I
no.
know, I know. So many people use that as the rationale, and like, I don't know, it just really does scare me. Just because you hear horror stories, and I've heard many races where, no fault of the race organizers, whatever. If it's just that team that was at that station, um, I don't know. I just think about like it can't hurt you to have what you've practiced on race day. I don't know. Well, you're gonna have to get back to us and let us know how it did go in New York if you
Well,
if you do
I'm not sure
take
yet.
less.
I'm, like, stressing, like, I'm sweating talking about it right
I
now,
know
like, it's
you're the
stressing
ultimate
me.
planner, so I'm surprised you're gonna get out of your comfort zone and do this.
Well, I emailed the New York Roadrunners and I said, I use what you have on course, but I'm nervous because they only have it at mile 12 and at mile 18. And I'm like, I'm nervous that you guys are gonna run out. And they were like, oh, we've never run out. Like we've never ever had an issue where we've run out. We know how to do this and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, okay. So I don't know. I'll
Yeah,
let you know what I decide. But
that is a pretty well-oiled machine, I must say.
I
Right?
mean,
Like
they've run
they seem like they've,
this is
yeah,
either the 53rd or the 54th time they've done it.
right.
So they know what they're doing, but eh,
Hey, runner, want 4 free gels? Did you know that proper nutrition is one of the 6 steps to growing in your running journey? So, if you've never eaten anything for your runs, or you've tried other gels, but you just didn't like the taste, or quite frankly, the texture, or you always get stomach discomfort whenever you try to fuel your workouts, it's time to give UCAN a try. It is the fuel that allowed me to crush a 23-minute marathon PR, and UCAN is what powered my 48.6 magical miles in Disney as part of the Dopey Challenge. The top US marathon runners, whether it's Emily Sisson, Sarah Hall, or Emma Bates, all use UCAN to power their workouts and their runs. But it's not just for elite runners. As a running physical therapist and coach, it is my go to recommendation for the athletes I work with. Now, UCAN is offering our Spark Healthy Runner community an exclusive chance to try 4 Edge samples for free. All you do is pay the cost of shipping. So just head over to ucan.co/healthy runner to claim this offer, or just drop UCAN in the comments and I'll shoot you the special link. And while you're over there, you might as well grab a box of energy bars. Salted peanut butter is my favorite, and I have it after my runs and before my strength sessions. As always, let's maintain a strong mind, a strong body, and let's just keep on running, powered by UCAN. What about hydration strategy?
so this needs to also be the same as what you're doing on your long runs. We're not doing anything new. We're not changing our hydration either. So if you're using water and electrolytes during your long runs, you're doing that during the race. That's perfect. A lot of races like to use Gatorade Endurance, and they provide Gatorade and water. So usually it's a Gatorade stop first, and then water tables are next. Sometimes it's flipped. If you plan to use the Gatorade on the course, practice it. Make sure you have practiced it and make sure it sits okay in your stomach. Some people don't like Gatorade and they just go for the water. Either one is fine. I take the Gatorade and then I go and get some water. So I do both, but I also take it with me on my long runs. Actually, I took it with me today. I had a 6 mile run that I started later in the day than I normally run right now since it's still crazy hot. and I took Gatorade with me, and I didn't take water, and it was great, and it was fine. So you want to practice what you plan to do on the course. If you don't want to use Gatorade, then just take water for long runs. You want to practice your water stops, and that doesn't mean just like practice drinking out of a cup. Which tip for you guys, if you pinch the cup to make it like kind of a point, like a triangle, and pour it into your mouth, you're not going to splash it all over your face or down your shirt. So I've done that many of times, and that pinching the cup works very well. But you also want to practice drinking. I'm just going to say drinking, whether it's Gatorade or water, drinking at the intervals in which your aid stations are going to be, to kind of get your body used to having that time in between. Now, most races have them about every mile, some are every 2 miles. Look at what your race has. It's going to tell you on their website when they have their aid stations, where they are. They'll tell you exactly. Aid station number 3 is at mile 6.4. Like, they're going to tell you where they are. So practice that in your long runs. My clients that do a 20-mile long run or an 18-mile long run, whatever their longest long run is, I call it their test run. We are practicing exactly how race day is going to be. You're going to be drinking at the intervals that you will for the race. You're going to be fueling at the intervals for the race. You're wearing your race day kit. We are not changing anything. This is our time to make sure that all the pieces are going to work together. Because if you can do 20, you can do 20.6, 26.2. Sorry. So practice, 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 practice. So you can also bring salt chews or salt tabs, or I use the base performance salts. It's like a little vial of salt. It looks like pink Himalayan salt, and you just lick your finger, dip it in, and it's really salty and delicious. And sometimes it just breaks up that sweetness from your gels and the Gatorade. It's fantastic. I highly recommend. It's my favorite. But practice
Yeah.
that, and practice doing it while you're running, because a lot of us will be like, oh, I'm at a stoplight. Let me get some salt now. No, practice opening the vial or opening the bag, putting them in your mouth. Practice doing that while you're running, because most likely during the race, you're not going to want to stop. So practice all of that.
Yeah, and you will drop them on the floor if you don't practice, and you will, like with the base electrolyte salt. I remember when you told me about that over 2 years ago, and I've been using it since. The first time I went out with it, I didn't lock the vial all the way, so then I had it all in my pocket. So you need to practice these things, because it will happen on race day if you don't practice. So you know, like, what to make sure you do, and hear the click, and it gets stuck sometimes, and the
And the
seam.
salt gets on it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So I think the biggest take home there is, if you didn't know, the big difference between marathon, half marathon training and racing is, sometimes for half marathons, you can get away with actually not using electrolytes. Many people can't, especially if the temperature gets above 55 degrees and or it's humid, or you're just a really salty sweater. But some people can get away without using electrolytes for a half marathon. You cannot get away with it for a marathon unless
No,
it's
you will cramp.
super cold marathon and you are like exceptionally trained and you are not a salty sweater whatsoever. Maybe you could, but you would be like a unicorn. All right. So if you haven't been supplementing with electrolytes, you need to have an electrolyte strategy. Brooke also talked about specific electrolyte strategy in episode 235 on the Healthy Runner podcast. So you can check out that training to get a little bit more deeper dive. And we always get questions on like how much, the intervals you should do and all of that. She kind of answered all those questions. But you need electrolytes. And that was the big mistake that I made in my first one when I mentioned the cramping episode. I was not taking enough. I was only taking what was in my gels at the time. I wasn't supplementing on top of that. So you will need to supplement on top of that. And like Whitney said, practice it in training, get used to it. Even if you are training in cold weather conditions, you will need to utilize it during race day, because race days, the effort level is going to be that much higher. You're going to be sweating more. So you need to actually replenish those electrolytes that we lose in sweat, because your muscles need that in order to actually function and to help you actually run and finish that race strong. So you need to practice it. Like when I was doing dopey training, it was cold winter months here in Connecticut in December. yeah, really November, December, and I really didn't need electrolytes per se, but I was practicing it because that's what I was going to be doing on race day. So all great points there. I would like to kind of speak to weather strategy. And heck, man, the weather in has been crazy these last couple of years. Whether it's the record temperatures we had at the New York City Marathon 2 years ago, this past year Boston was super hot, and that affected performance. We've had really cold marathons. So, can you just speak to kind of weather strategy and what should runners going into their marathon race, thinking about in terms of weather?
Well, you kind of need to plan for everything because you never know. Weather changes so fast. Like you can check the weather on Friday for your Sunday marathon, and it says it's beautiful. It's going to be a high of 59, great weather, no clouds, maybe a little clouds. And then Saturday, it's like, okay, now there's like a 20% chance of rain and it's going to be 40. Then Sunday morning, it's like thunderstorms and torrential rain and plan for everything because you don't know what's going to happen. So, especially if you're traveling to a race, take it all. Take your rain gear, take your arm sleeves and your gloves, take a tank top, take your singlet, take a long sleeve, take everything because you don't know, especially these fall race. Well, I guess fall and spring. You don't know if it's going to be cold or hot, especially New York. Sometimes it's mid 50s, sometimes it's mid 70s. Like, who knows? Plan for all possibilities. But that means in your training, if you do your long run on Saturday, do your long run on Saturday, whether it's raining or not, whether it's cold or not, whether it's hot or not. The one I would say to avoid, or a few, if the air quality warning is out there because there's smoke or something like that, and the air quality is not good, you can move your run. If there is a thunderstorm and there is lightning and thunder in your area, go ahead and move your run because that's not safe. But if it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's hot, just do your run because you don't know what race day is going to bring. So running through all conditions will prepare you for that. But plan for all weather. The chance, most likely, your race, the start is going to be cold because it's in the morning. And that's just how things are. It's cold and then it warms up, right? So you want to wear lots of layers. I think I mentioned that I put a bunch of my throwaway clothes or my toss clothes in my cabinet already. Now, what that means, those are my layers that I'm going to wear to the start village. I've got a pair of sweatpants. I've got a sweatshirt. I've got actually toss shoes because I don't like to wear my race shoes to the race. And I have toss socks because if you've met me, like I'm special. So I have all those things, but I know that I'm going to probably get rid of them because it's going to warm up. Now, a lot of marathons you'll run, you'll see sweatshirts just strewn about for the first like maybe 5 miles, like here and there people toss their sweatshirts. And I've done that. I started the Tucson marathon. I did the half this past December. And I started with a zip up sweatshirt because do a zip up. I promise you don't want to be trying to take something off over your head. Do a zip up. And I had it, and at one point I unzipped it, I ran a little bit, and then I was like, okay, now I'm ready to take this off. I took it off and tossed it to the side of the road. So you want to make sure you're warm at the start because the last thing you want is to sit in the start village and like be shivering and like frozen. So because you want to keep your body warm, right? Because you're about to go and use your muscles. So lots of layers. Bring a poncho. Bring a trash bag, something that you can cover yourself with if it's raining or if it's cold, because that will kind of insulate and keep you warm. Another thing that I like to do, especially if I know it's going to be muddy or wet, I like to, like I said, I bring toss shoes, like old running shoes that I don't wear anymore that I've been saving for this race. I'll wear those, but then I put like a grocery bag over my shoes and tie them so that my feet don't get wet because you don't want to start a race with wet feet. Even if you do plan to change your shoes, trying to put dry socks on wet feet and then put your shoes on, it's just not fun. So keep your feet dry. Bring it all with you because you don't know.
Yeah, no, those things are extremely important. Like I could think back to the Disney races as well. They start at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. It can be cold, it can be warm. It all depends. Usually have those throwaway clothes. I know you mentioned Mylar blanket earlier. I didn't know what the heck a Mylar blanket was before I started using them. They're usually, if you guys think about those, like they look metallic, they're like the lightweight things you see people after a marathon get to keep themselves warm. Um, Usually if you get them from a previous race, like just save them and then you can
That's what I
bring
do.
them to keep you warm. If you don't have a sweatshirt for a throwaway, you can use that to keep yourself warm. I think many would argue, how warm is it really keeping you, or do you need multiple? But you need to bring something to keep yourself warm in the beginning. And then, I think adjusting, like you talked about, adjusting for um, hotter races, and you do need to make adjustments. And I first thing that really comes to my mind is actually last weekend I had an athlete who raced the Disneyland Halloween half marathon, but they had some triple digit temperatures out in California last weekend. So heading into the weekend, my client, we communicated and needed to adjust our race strategy that we just had on our call the week before. And so we did adjust because of the heat warning, and we needed to adjust the paces to accommodate the heat, because if we didn't and we went out with the same plan, then she would have totally blew up. And like this client, like I'm so proud of her. She is not active on social media, so I'm going to give her a little shout out here on the podcast. I've been working with her for almost a year now, and she got out of hip pain, got back to racing, and ran some really hard half marathon, and completed some hard half marathon training for 2 cycles. And this was like, the next one where we upped the training, and she did phenomenal, like training in Florida weather in the summer, which was just like, so I really wanted this race to be like, she could feel really good about, even if her time was slightly slower than last time because of the weather. And realistically, it would be, right, because of the weather. So in order to set her up for success, we had to adjust that pacing strategy. So for instance, like that first, third of the race, or the first part of the race, I even took it down 15 seconds, like a little bit more conservative. And then the rest of the pacing strategy, we took down like 10 seconds from that point forward, which really allowed her to actually ease into the race, keep the effort level where it needed to be. She did an amazing job, like locking in on those cruise miles in the middle. And then, she was able to actually run her fastest miles despite it being in the mid 80-degree temperature wise, for the end of her race, because she did adjust of what her like current fitness level was. So she was able to actually like run a super strong race. She was 112 out of like 7,491 women. So super
Amazing.
impressive. Super impressive. I was so proud of her. Um, even though the time on the clock was not what her goal time was, right? And even though it wasn't as fast as the half marathon that she ran last spring, but weather happens, guys. And, you need to make adjustments for it, and you need to be realistic again, because if you're not, then you're going to set yourself up for failure. And like, why do you want to set yourself up for failure? Right. Um, so you need to definitely make those adjustments with weather. So I think those all great tips here. As we kind of finish up here, if you could kind of share with me kind of some quick tips on race day kit or clothing. What are some things that you really want our listeners to know?
If you haven't worn it, don't wear it. If you haven't tried it, don't wear it. Honestly, don't change anything. Don't go out and buy a new pair of socks. Don't wear a new sports bra. Don't. The only one I would say you could possibly do that you haven't tried is if you're going to wear arm sleeves, because those, if they start bothering you, you just take them off. That's pretty easy. You just take them off. Um, Headphones, sunglasses, hats. If you're wearing a hydration pack or a handheld, these are all things you need to have tried several times to know that they're going to work. Don't try something new on race day. I would also say if you have ever chafed anywhere during any part of this training cycle, use, well, I use squirrel's nut butter. So use your nut butter a little extra on those spots. Like I get a spot right at the bottom where my sports bra is, and it's only 2 of my sports bras that do it, and I've narrowed it down. So I'm not going to use those for my races. But I'll put a little extra right there just in case. And then I have like one spot where like my waistband rubs, but that's in my shorts, not in my running pants. So use a little extra chafing salve, but nothing new. Nothing.
Yeah, and Whitney is like our gear geek. So we actually did a full episode just on gear for like summer running, which is basically gonna be what you're gonna wear for marathon running and racing. So check out episode 234 on the Healthy Runner podcast to get kind of that gear guide, because Whitney really went in depth into like exactly what you need, recommendations, certain products for each area, literally head to toe. So get that deep dive. And then the next or the last kind of thing I do want to talk about is mental strategy. And what are the things that you think are most important for marathoners to be thinking about for race day?
So I didn't put this in my notes. However, it is important to have not only an A goal, but a B goal and a C goal when you're going into your race. Now, if this is your first marathon, your A goal is going to be to finish the race. You really don't need to have a B goal or a C goal. Just finishing the race is going to be the biggest accomplishment. Like Duane said before, you only have one first marathon. So enjoy it, soak up every moment of that race because you will never forget it. If this is your 7th marathon, 10th, 50th, whatever, you probably are going to have an A goal, which means the weather is perfect. You are feeling great on race day. You feel mentally there. Your kit is on point. Your training went well. Like everything, all the stars have aligned. That's your A goal. That most likely is your time based A goal. Your B goal is okay, things are maybe it's a little windy or maybe it's a little hot, but I'm still feeling really great. I might have to dial my pacing back a smidge. I'd be still happy if I hit this. Okay. Your C goal is all right, it is 5 billion degrees outside, or maybe it's snowing. I don't know. And the wheels have fallen off. You didn't sleep well. You didn't eat well. Like you're just not really feeling it today. This is going to be your maybe I just want to finish the race goal. But you need to figure out what those goals are for yourself and know them because sometimes you get into a race and you get like 10 miles in and those first 10 felt great. You get to 10, 11, 12, and something's off. Maybe you're starting to have GI issues or you're starting to cramp because you didn't have enough electrolytes or something. So maybe you adjust halfway through the race and dial it back to your B goal. You need to know what those goals are and be okay with all of them because that realistically, nobody has a good race every single time. So if you haven't had a bad race in a while, make sure you have those goals because it's coming at some point. I'm due for a bad race here soon, so I'm a little nervous. But yeah, another thing is to make sure that you visualize the race, the different parts of the race we talked about, looking at the course map and knowing where the hills are or where the downhills are. Visualize those. So for me, when I ran the Flying Pig Marathon, this is a race that the top 3 finishers will tell people like nobody's going to PR. You take your PR and you add 7 minutes. This course is that challenging. Like don't go to this race hoping for a PR. Go for the experience. So I was like, oh gosh, so that's scary. So I visualized the hills. I visualized myself going up the hill, feeling strong and smiling going up the hills. I visualized myself getting to the top of the hill and being like, yes, I am at the top of this hill. There is it's like a 1.5 mile hill. It's pretty bad. There's only one more killer hill that's pretty straight up, but it's very short. It's like not even 2/10 of a mile. It's a very short one. I know I can get to that one. I visualize myself going up that one. I visualize myself crossing the finish line. I spent a lot of time visualizing for that race because I knew that that one was going to be mentally challenging for myself with it being such a hard course. Now, I like to visualize the time on the clock when I'm like running through the finish line, which I know is not the accurate time, but in my brain, that finish time is only for me. That time on that clock is exactly when I cross the start line. That is my finish time. So when I'm visualizing, I am visualizing what my finish time is going to be. And some people do it what their watch says. You can do it however you want, but I find that that really helped me to be mentally strong going into the race. And I just have such a better outlook going into it versus being like, oh, this is going to be so hard. I don't know what to do. Right. I'm excited and I can see it. So I do that. I also I don't have them on today and I wish I had put them on, but I wear mantra bracelets. So I have for each race, I get one made. I just had my New York City one made. I had one that said flying pig, and of course it was all pink because everything for the pig is pink. And it said flying pig, and then I had one that said 26.2, and then I had one that said don't think, and one that said just go. Don't think, just go. Those are my two that I have made for every single race. For some reason, that mantra for me works. Don't think, just go. Because I tend to overthink things. So don't think about it. Just do
Hmm.
it. You have your pacing plan, just follow it. Don't think about it. Just go. Some people like to do you are strong, or you trained for this, or you're ready, or I can do hard things, run the mile you're in. There are so many mantras out there that you got to find what works for you. So that's a personal thing, but that for me, having that on my wrist and I can look down and be like, all right, get out of your head. Just think, don't think, just go, just go. So that works really well for me.
I love that. And yeah, there are so many mantras that you can try out in training. And like Whitney said, they are very personal. So you're going to find some that help you and some others that don't. So then you want to utilize the ones that help you in training during a really hard speed work day, during a really hard long run, and something just stuck. That's what you want to use for race day. They are very personal and they can change over races, over years. Mine have changed over time. This is an area that I definitely am intrigued about in terms of what the brain can overcome when physically your body is like telling you to slow down. And there's like some fascinating research in this area. And I did have a great conversation with Chris McClung in episode 173 on the Healthy Runner podcast, all about mantras, mental strategies for race day. So I would highly recommend you guys check that one out if you want to learn more about this area. But I also love that you talked about visualization, because visualizing the race before race day is super important as well. It's really helpful for the brain to actually feel like you've already done it. If you have visualized what it's going to look like, what it's going to sound like, and you can do this either during runs and training, during hard workouts and training. You can do this during meditation when you're just kind of unwinding for the evening, or starting your day in the morning. I did that for Cape Cod. I found it extremely helpful to visualize all of the steps that are going to lead up to race day. How is it going to feel? What's it going to look like? You can Google, if you're not sure about the race, you can Google images of the race. You can watch videos on YouTube of your race, and that will help get those images in your brain before you've actually run the race. So you know what it looks like in New York to be able to go over the Verrazano, right? It's like you've already been there because you visualized it. You've seen those images, and you know that you're going to be holding back, like Whitney talked about before, and not going out too fast. And you're envisioning the thousands of runners that are running with you over that bridge. Visualization can be super helpful. Mantras can be super helpful. In that episode, we talk about like different types of mantras for different parts of the race, following the race day strategy. Mantras that are going to get you in a rhythm, that are going to keep your body in control, keep your heart rate down, keep your breathing in check, and keep you kind of going. Versus fight mantras. And these are the ones that you're going to pull out at the end when the brain is saying, slow down, but you're really looking to pick up, and be able to close hard. So all those things are super helpful. Like I said, we could do a whole episode just on that, and I will. I actually have a couple of guests coming up within the next couple of months that we will be talking more about the mindset bucket in growing in your running journey. So I think that was probably the most important things right now that we could include in this episode. So just to kind of summarize today, guys, in really looking at your ultimate guide to conquering your like marathon race day strategy, Whitney really shared with you kind of the preparation is key. How do we prepare? What are the things we need to plan for your marathon race day? She really shared some great insight into marathon pacing strategy and how we break that down, whether you're using a 3-part system, 6-part system, and when at, what points of the race what do we want to be thinking about? What do we want to be running in terms of pace at different points of the race? And honestly, breaking it into those parts makes it so much more manageable, that it's not this huge 26.2 miles that you're focusing on. It's not this huge 4 hour, 5 hour, 6 hour time period that you're like thinking about. Just focus on the particular part that you're in. It makes it so much more manageable. The nutrition strategy, and shared some great tips in terms of practicing nothing new on race day, kind of the whole we talked about during run fuel. We talked about the hydration electrolyte strategy that we want to be able to utilize on race day. Talked about adjusting to weather, whether it's cold or if it's too hot, how do we make adjustments, what to wear on race day, nothing new. That's like the overall theme, right, of today is kind of nothing new, and we should be practicing. So I'm really hoping a lot of you are listening to this during training and you still have time to practice. And obviously, if not, if you're like races tomorrow or the next day, hopefully these tips are still helpful for you. But now you know, and you'll know for your next marathon. And then the mental strategies, where it is a mental game, especially that last 10K. Like that is the mental game. That's when you've earned the right to race. And that's when you can pull out some of these tools and tips in terms of visualization, mantras, going fishing. There's so many other games and things you can play during those last 6.2 miles of the race. Yeah, Whitney, this has been great. I always love talking about racing. We could talk all day. Like we're already,
Good.
almost
We
like an
good.
hour and a half into this. We could make this a 3-hour episode, but I do want to kind of wrap it up here. And thank you for educating our
Absolutely.
community about race day strategy for the marathon. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and if you guys have been struggling with executing a marathon race day strategy and you really want some more specific guidance on some of the like sticking points that you've struggled with, whether it has been fuel, whether it's been mental game, whether it's actually been the training part and like, knowing your paces, that's exactly what we do in our Healthy Runner signature coaching program. So if you want to learn more about that, working with Coach Whitney or any of the coaches on our team, you can simply learn more by going to learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com/coaching. And I hope this has been helpful for you. And the only thing that I ask is if you found value from it, just do me a favor and copy the link wherever you're listening to this. Share it with a runner friend of yours who is running a marathon, because I'm sure they are going to appreciate you, because they're going to probably pick up at minimum, I have to say, like at least one thing, right? Like, did you guys learn at least one thing? You probably learned multiple things. And if you did, like help a runner friend out who's running a marathon as well. I'm sure they will appreciate it and they're going to pay it forward for you someday in sharing any running tips with them. And we just want to, spread this knowledge of how we do this the right way within our local running communities, so we can all enjoy the physical, mental benefits that running has to offer, and that we love so much, and that we can do this. We could train for marathons. It doesn't need to suck. You don't need to get injured training for a marathon or racing a marathon. And if you're listening to this on the Spark Healthy Runner YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you'll get notified when the next time a training like this comes out. Or if you're listening to this on the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. And if you're listening during a run, like hopefully you're crushing your run right now. I hope you're enjoying those mental clearing miles. And if you've liked this training, then you're surely like the next one on post-marathon pitfalls, avoiding the 5 common mistakes. And if you're listening on the pod, queue up 201 on the Healthy Runner podcast. And if you're watching YouTube, then just click the video that I have for you guys here next to get that training. As always, let's maintain a strong mind, a strong body, and let's just keep on running. Until next time.